Hello everybody, this is Backblast and here are my top 25 tips for building a zoo in Planet Zoo. You can make a 2-meter wide path for your staff or even for the guests if you like, and the way to stop them walking through the scenery that you've put there is to put bins behind it and they won't walk through the bins. Alternatively, if you actually want to make a 2-meter path, I'll put a link to a little tutorial. It's a bit too long to tell you how to do it here, so I'll put the link up here. Do you want to make an incline in your zoo? But you don't want the full incline like that, you want a smaller one? Simply go into the right hand side over here, scroll down to elevated length, switch that on, and then you can make a much smaller incline. So you can make something that's much more friendly for maybe a shorter bridge. How's that? Did you know that you can delete multiple paths? So if you click on paths, click delete path, and then you can just click and simply drag it along the path and delete lots and lots of pathways. Remember to switch it off again afterwards. Alternatively, when you're building paths and you want them to lock to a current enclosure that you've got, scroll down in the right hand side, click this one, snap alongside barriers, make sure it's switched on, and then you can just build and it will build right along the side of your enclosure, thus making it nice and tidy. When making new paths, you've got a couple of options here. So the first one is you can press Z at this point. Before I've even clicked anything, press Z, and then if I move the mouse around, I can create paths at all sorts of different angles. That's quite a useful tip. Also, if I'm making a new path come into an existing path and I don't want it to come in at a strange angle like that, I can press Z and it will give me a right angle. Rather than a funny curvy angle, it'll give me a right angle. There you go. Finally, with the paths, if I want to put another path down here but I don't want it to join up, so it's trying to join up, I want to make another path, it's trying to join, press Control. It'll stop this path joining the other path. So when I'm building here, it'll mean that I can place this path right next to it without it wanting to join. So that way you can get two paths running parallel. Maybe you want them close, but then instead of joining up, you want them to go in different directions. But that's one way of getting the paths really close together initially without it trying to join it. Press Control. We're now going to look at some simple tips for when you're building things in your zoo. So the first thing I'm going to say is, if you're scrolling around your buildings, sometimes that's a little bit too quick. So if you press T, it'll mean that the scrolling goes much slower. There you go. So you can then change where you're looking very, very slowly rather than just whizzing about. So if you're trying to get some fine detail in somewhere, or you want to just look at a certain angle, press T and it'll help you focus on that little bit. If you then want to move quickly again, but don't want to keep switching this on and off, you can just press Shift and it'll briefly switch off or on, just so you can skip along, no problem. Another thing I'd suggest when you're looking at building is turn off your animal aging. So go into your settings and go into your game, into the animal settings, and then reduce the animal aging rate all the way up to 5, which means that the animals will grow older much slower, and it means that you're not getting a message every 2 or 3 minutes saying something new's been born. It'll just help you focus on the building while you want to be doing that. Also, while you're building your zoo, in order to keep that frame rate nice and low, you don't want loads and loads of people in your zoo. You might want a few in just so that you can pick up any problems, but you don't want 3,000, 4,000 people walking about. So in order to keep your frame rate nice and low, press Escape, go into your settings, into the Game tab, into Guest Settings, tick limit number of guests, and then reduce it to whatever you want in your zoo. This will help keep your stuttering to a minimum. Another thing you should do while you're building is save your blueprints. So if you actually make something within the zoo, it's worth keeping. This is just the selection that I've made while making my Chester Zoo, if you understand what I'm saying. Altogether, there are 47 different barriers, fences, and doors that I've created and had to reuse throughout the zoo. All different styles and models, and it just makes it so much easier to get them back out of your blueprints rather than having to recreate them every time you need to make a new fence. 47 different varieties. Sometimes while you're working in your zoo, you might want to be looking at something inside or when it's gone dark outside, and it's quite difficult to see the actual detail. Just press L and you can turn the lights back on, and that means that you can work inside. You'll see whatever detail you need to look at. Alternatively, if you go into this setting down at the bottom, this will only work in sandbox, not franchise. You can go in there, you can change the hour to whichever you wish, and then press space to stop the game running. So what will happen is you'll have people in your zoo, but they won't be walking about anymore, and also the daylight cycle won't affect how your building is. So just switch off the people wandering about. It's effectively pausing the game just while you build, and that'll mean you don't have to use the light switch when you're building in the dark. Now, sometimes when you're building, you might want to do something like put some land up underneath a ride so that it doesn't look as though the ride's floating in the air. For whatever reason, you might want it to sit on the land. But the game doesn't let you do that. So let's just switch that off. If you go into your settings, into the game, and then there are 3 settings here. Disable scenery collision, track collision, and terrain collision. Click apply and then OK, and then you should be able to build your terrain all the way up to your rides, so you can have your ride sat on the terrain, or even if you wish you can have it going through the terrain. But that's where you switch it off within the game, and I suggest that you switch all 3 of those off. Now, if you've ever been building a building and all of a sudden you're trying to put maybe a roof piece in or something like that, and the roof piece is jumping about because you can't quite get it in the right spot and it's not quite going where you want it to. If you press Control, it allows you to move the piece square by square to where you want it to go. So rather than it going up and down as well, it'll just go left and right, or backwards and forwards depending on which way you move your mouse. Just giving you a little bit more control when you're placing those pieces. Alternatively, if you're building something and you want to place it onto, say, a building like this, let's just place this, and we want it in the middle, but we're not quite sure where the middle is and we're trying to judge it, press F, and that will snap it to the middle of whichever piece you're trying to put it on. You can switch the thing off again so that you can move it around if you wish, but that's just pressing F. And finally, within my building phase, if we go into the push and pull section, so let's say I'm building something here and I'm not quite done it as I want. I don't want to keep going down here and changing things. If you press Control, it will just reverse the mouse. So if I let go of Control, it will build. If I press Control, it will push down again. Thus meaning you can keep one hand on the control, keeping you in control. Now you've created a lovely zoo and you want to show it off to people. So what do? You want to create a little video showing your way around the place. But what you don't want is to just be doing a flyby like the red arrows. What you want is a nice slow shot. So the first thing we need to do, tip number 1 of this bit, is press G, and it will get rid of all this writing around the outside. So that makes it look absolutely gorgeous. The second thing is a tip we've already mentioned. Pressing the T key slows down the camera view. So it means that when you do your scrolling, you get a beautiful flyby of your zoo, highlighting all the best features without flying past, so everything's in a blur. Absolutely beautiful. Who wouldn't want to visit this zoo? So for the last section, I want to talk about franchises, and there's a couple of things to do. The first thing you need to do if you're doing a franchise zoo, and this is very important, very, very close to your entrance, build an information booth, because an information booth doesn't just sell maps and umbrellas, or they used to sell umbrellas, I think they still sell umbrellas. What it also sells is things like adoption packs. Now the adoption packs are actually worth quite a lot of money. Quite often, like this £50 one here, it's worth more than it costs to actually get into the zoo. So people buying one of these will be almost doubling the amount they've spent. They spend 20-30 simoleons to get in, and then it's another 25-50 for an adoption pack. Now they'll only do that if they actually get a lot of education while in the zoo. So make sure that you've got lots of the information signs and the information signs for the actual enclosure. That will increase the education level. And the final thing is, again, something that I've mentioned before. If you're starting off in a franchise zoo, what I said earlier was, in your settings you can change the rate that animals grow older. If you're doing a franchise zoo and you're just setting off, knock this all the way back down to 1 again, because your animals will then breed faster, meaning that you can release them to the wild, getting a lot more of the conservation credits, or you can sell them for cash just to help boost your credit there. The final thing I want to mention with franchise zoos is a lot of people suffer with education, in that they don't quite know where they're struggling with it. What they've introduced now is an actual education tab down here, so you can have a look at what the guest rating is, what it is per species, and you can see here I've got a few things that aren't powered, so they aren't going to help. And finally, it tells you in here how many guests each one of those conservation boards has reached. So for example, this one here, nobody's seen this, so it might be in the wrong position. And certainly there are some species that haven't got signs next to them. So check your education tab in order to get that money rolling in. I hope that you've enjoyed this little series on my top tips for Planet Zoo, whether that's building or whether that's path laying, or even just for making things pretty when you're doing your videos. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please subscribe to the channel. My name is Backblast. I'll catch you next time.